The Grand Hall of the Zorth Empire was a place of pride and power. Its walls were made of gold-like stone, glowing softly in the light of distant suns. Every pillar shone with carvings of victories and conquests. The Zorth had ruled the galaxy for centuries, and their queen, Zalira, sat on her throne like a goddess made of steel and fire. Her eyes glimmered with cold silver light, sharp and merciless. To her, the universe was a place of strength and weakness, had no place in it. On that day, her court gathered for a rare event. The air was thick with curiosity as the great doors opened, and a group of humans entered the hall. They looked small compared to the towering Zorath nobles. No shining armor, no glowing weapons, just plain uniforms, dusty boots, and eyes filled with quiet determination. There were 6 of them, led by a man named Captain Elias Ward. His posture was straight, his steps calm. He walked like someone who had already faced death and made peace with it. The queen's lips curved into a mocking smile. "So these," she said, her voice smooth and sharp, "are the warriors from Earth? The ones who dare to call themselves soldiers?" Her courtiers laughed loudly. The sound bounced off the golden walls, echoing like cruel music. Some Zorth nobles covered their mouths as they giggled. Others stared at the humans as if looking at strange, foolish creatures from a forgotten world. Queen Zalira rose from her throne. Her silver gown shimmered as she walked closer. "Tell me, Captain Ward," she said slowly, her voice carrying across the hall, "do humans still fight with sticks and stones? Or have you learned to beg instead?" But the man didn't flinch. His eyes met hers, steady, fearless. "We fight with heart, Your Majesty," he said softly, "and sometimes that is enough." The hall fell silent. The queen tilted her head, surprised that this fragile-looking creature had dared to answer her so boldly. She studied him carefully. His face was weathered, but calm, his voice polite but unshaken. It was strange to her. Most who stood before her trembled. This one did not. The queen let out a quiet laugh. "Heart," she repeated, as if tasting the word. How amusing. In this galaxy, heart does not win. War's power does. Ward said nothing more. He simply looked around the hall at the carvings of battles and burning planets, then back at her. There was no anger in his gaze, no pride, only a quiet sadness, as if he pitied her without saying it aloud. That look made something twist deep inside the queen's chest, though she did not understand why. To hide the strange feeling, she turned away sharply and waved her hand. "You will demonstrate your so-called heart before my warriors tomorrow," she declared. "We shall see if your courage survives the taste of fear." Her court cheered, excited by the idea of watching the weak humans fail. But as they laughed and shouted, Ward and his team stood quietly, unmoved by the noise around them. They had heard laughter like this before, on battlefields, where their enemies mocked them right before losing everything. As the humans were escorted out of the hall, Queen Zalira returned to her throne. She looked proud again, yet a small part of her mind replayed that one sentence, "We fight with heart." The words shouldn't have mattered, but they did. When the hall emptied and the laughter faded, she sat alone, her silver crown gleaming in the dim light. She had conquered planets, destroyed fleets, and broken empires. She had never feared anyone. Yet the calm eyes of that human captain lingered in her thoughts like an echo that refused to fade. For the first time in years, the great queen of the Zorath felt something she couldn't name, something that was not power, not pride, not anger. It was something quieter, something like curiosity, and deep within her, though she would never admit it, the smallest spark of doubt had begun to glow. The next day arrived with the light of 2 suns spilling through the crystal windows of the palace. The grand hall of the Zorth Empire was filled again, crowds of alien nobles, commanders and soldiers, all waiting for the spectacle the queen had promised. The golden floor gleamed like fire. Banners of victory hung from every wall. Queen Zalira sat upon her high throne, calm and proud. Her face was unreadable, but her silver eyes glowed with expectation. She had seen countless duels in her life, but this one would be different. She wanted to watch these humans break, to see that quiet confidence on their faces turn to fear. When the humans entered, the crowd began to murmur. They looked so small under the tall archways, their simple uniforms standing out in a hall of jewels and armor. Captain Elias Ward walked at the front again. His steps were slow and steady, his gaze firm. Behind him followed 5 others, 2 men and 3 women. They said nothing. They did not bow. They simply stood together, shoulder to shoulder, as one. The Queen's voice filled the hall. "Today," she declared, "we will see what makes humans call themselves warriors. My elite guards will face them. If the humans last one round, I shall call them brave. If not, they will leave this world knowing their true place beneath us." The audience cheered. The sound thundered through the hall. The Zorath soldiers entered, a team of towering figures covered in dark silver armor, their weapons glowing faintly. Their very presence made the air heavy. Ward and his team didn't move. They didn't draw weapons. They had none. The Queen had forbidden them from using any advanced gear. Only their training and their courage were allowed. A faint smile crossed Ward's face. "We understand the rules," he said quietly. "We'll do our best." One of the Zorath generals laughed from the side. "Your best. You'll need a miracle, human." The gong sounded. The aliens charged like storms of metal and muscle. The humans didn't meet their strength head-on. They moved. They dodged. They ducked. They worked together like one living mind. Where one human stumbled, another pulled them up. Where one was cornered, the others surrounded and protected them. Their moves were small, fast, and full of intent. It wasn't chaos. It was unity. The Queen leaned forward, watching carefully. The humans were hit, knocked down, bruised, but every time they rose again. Their faces were covered in sweat, but not fear. Each time one fell, the others reached for them. It was a rhythm, a pulse that refused to stop. The alien warriors grew frustrated. Their strikes grew harder, wilder, but the humans only grew calmer. They began to read the rhythm of their enemies, anticipating each movement. They couldn't overpower the Zorath, but they could outthink them. Finally, the gong rang again. The first round had ended. All 6 humans were still standing. Some blood on their lips, some dirt on their faces, but their eyes were bright. The hall was silent. No one clapped. No one moved. Even the Queen did not speak for a long time. She had expected fear, surrender, or tears. But what she saw was something her empire had long forgotten. Endurance born from spirit. Captain Ward bowed slightly. Respectful yet firm. "Your Majesty," he said, breathing heavily, "you asked to see what we fight with. This is it. Not strength, not weapons, just heart." The Queen's silver eyes met his. For a moment, she said nothing. Then a slow, almost invisible smile touched her lips. "Heart," she repeated softly, as if the word itself carried power. Perhaps I was too quick to judge. But her pride wouldn't let her admit defeat so easily. She straightened and raised her hand. "Tomorrow," she declared, "you will face not my guards, but my champion. Let us see if this heart of yours survives the true strength of Zorath." The crowd erupted again, cheering for their Queen's challenge. Yet amid the noise, the humans stood quietly, tired, bruised but unshaken. Ward simply nodded. "We'll be ready," he said. When they were led away, Queen Zelira remained seated, her expression unreadable. But inside her chest, something stirred, a flicker of respect, a strange warmth she could not name. And that night, long after the hall was empty and silent, the mighty Queen of Zorath sat alone in her chamber, whispering to herself the words she could not forget. Heart. The next morning, the sky over the Zoroth training grounds glowed with a soft, pale light from 3 rising suns. The humans arrived at the vast arena, their faces calm, their steps deliberate. Towering above them, the Zorea soldiers flexed their long armored limbs, their weapons humming with energy. Every one of them was a living mountain of muscle and metal, bred for battle. The contrast could not have been greater. Queen Zelira's silver eyes scanned the humans from her throne high above. She sat with perfect posture, her fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. Her expression was a mask of amusement, yet her mind buzzed with curiosity. These fragile creatures had survived a test that would have crushed lesser beings. Now she wanted to see their true limits. The humans stood together, forming a small, tight circle. Captain Elias Ward led them, his chest rising and falling slowly, his gaze calm and unwavering. The others, LT, Mara, Sergeant Jin, and the three others mirrored his focus. None of them wore armor. None of them carried weapons. Their only tools were their bodies, their minds, and the bond between them. A hush fell over the arena. Even the wind seemed to pause as the Queen's voice rang out. Begin. The Zorith soldiers surged forward, their armored legs pounding against the ground like rolling thunder. Energy weapons crackled in their hands, their attacks fast and deadly. But the humans did not panic. Instead, they moved like water flowing around rocks. When one soldier lunged, Ward sidestepped and led him into another soldier's path. When another struck, Mara ducked and rolled, then returned to her position beside her teammates. They fought not to defeat, but to survive together. Every movement was precise, every action calculated to protect one another. When a soldier swung too hard, they used his momentum against him. When another tried to isolate them, the group formed a shield of human bodies. Defending one another without hesitation, the Queen leaned forward, her silver eyes narrowing. She had seen armies fall, civilizations crumble, and warriors defeated. Yet here were creatures so small and frail, standing against the mightiest of her soldiers, not with weapons, but with courage alone. Minutes stretched into hours. Sweat ran down human faces, bruises began to bloom across their skin, and their muscles screamed in protest. Yet they did not give in. When one stumbled, another reached a hand to lift them. When someone faltered, another whispered encouragement. Their strength was not in their fists or in their speed. It was in the invisible bond that held them together. The unyielding determination to stand no matter what. For the first time in centuries, Queen Zelira felt something new. A strange admiration stirred in her chest, mixed with a faint unease. How could creatures so small, so seemingly weak, withstand forces meant to crush them? The answer was simple, yet profound. They fought for each other. They fought for something beyond themselves. The gong sounded, echoing across the arena like the cry of a distant planet. The humans were still standing, all 6 of them battered and bloodied, yet unbroken. The Zoroth soldiers had faltered, their strikes met with the humans' unwavering determination. A ripple of stunned silence moved through the audience. No one had expected this. Not even the Queen had anticipated it. She rose slowly, her silver eyes fixed on Captain Ward. The man's chest heaved with exertion. His uniform torn, yet his gaze was calm, steady, and unafraid. "You survived," the Queen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You fought against everything I commanded, and you still stand." Ward bowed slightly, respect in his posture, but no fear. "We fight because we must, Your Majesty," he said softly. "Not because we are the strongest, not because we are invincible, but because we refuse to let one another fall." The Queen's lips tightened. She had conquered worlds, shattered fleets, and broken countless species, but she had never seen anything like this. The humans were fragile, yet they carried a power her armies could not touch. As they were led away, Ward glanced back at her throne. His eyes held no challenge, only quiet resolve. And in that look, Queen Zelira realized something she could not yet name. These humans were different. Not in size, not in strength, but in spirit. And for the first time, the mighty Queen of Zorith felt the stirrings of humility and the faint. Terrifying awareness that she had underestimated them. The arena had emptied, leaving behind only the echo of boots and the faint smell of sweat. Outside, the suns hung low, painting the sky with gold and crimson. Captain Elias Ward and his team returned to their quarters, exhausted but unbroken. Each step they took carried the weight of bruises, exhaustion, and pride. Meanwhile, Queen Zelira sat in her private chamber, high above the palace corridors. The golden walls reflected the light of the setting suns, but the glow did little to warm the Queen's thoughts. She had spent her reign conquering worlds, crushing enemies, and proving that the galaxy bowed to her power. Yet a quiet unease settled in her chest of feeling. She had not known in centuries. She remembered every detail of the humans' movements, the way they had dodged attacks, shielded one another, and risen again, despite their injuries. They had fought not for glory, not for recognition, not even for fear of punishment. They had fought for each other, and they had survived. After a long moment, she sent a messenger to summon Captain Ward when the human arrived. He bowed slightly, though his uniform was torn and his skin marked by bruises and sweat. His eyes remained calm, steady, and unafraid, like he carried a quiet confidence no attack could break. "You could have died," the Queen said, her silver voice cutting through the quiet room. "Why did you not surrender? Why did you not beg for mercy like most others would?" Ward straightened, his shoulders squared. He did not hesitate. "Because surrender is worse than death, Your Majesty," he replied softly. "On Earth, we have learned that the hardest battles are not against others, but against despair, against doubt, against the thought that we cannot continue. We do not give in to despair. We stand. We fight. We help each other rise again, even when everything seems lost." The Queen's brow furrowed. She had ruled countless species, yet she had never considered that courage could exist without strength, that victory could exist without power. "Despair?" she asked, intrigued despite herself. "Explain." Ward's gaze softened, though it never faltered. "When everything is against you," he said, "when you have no weapon, no advantage, no hope, humans still stand. We fight because giving up is never an option. Strength alone does not save us. Unity, willpower, and heart do. That is why we survive when others would fail." The Queen leaned back, her thoughts turning over his words like a stone in her hand. She had been raised to value power, to see weakness as contemptible. Yet these humans, fragile, unarmored, seemingly ordinary, had defied every expectation. They had not only survived, they had outshone warriors, 10 times their size and strength. "You speak boldly for someone who could have died in my arena today," she said finally. Her tone was softer now, quieter, almost reflective. "Most beings would have trembled, screamed, or begged. You did none of these?" Ward's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Because fear teaches us nothing, Your Majesty. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in spite of it. And we do not act for ourselves alone. We act for each other." The Queen stared at him, words failing her. She had been the conqueror of empires, the master of fleets. And yet here stood a man smaller than her smallest guards, teaching her something she had never learned, that power was not measured in strength, but in resilience, in unity, and in the refusal to break. For hours, she remained silent, watching him leave. The words lingered in her mind, echoing louder than any cheer from the arena. They haunted her, stirred her, and challenged the foundation of everything she had believed. That night, lone in her chamber, Queen Zalira could not sleep. The suns had set, leaving only the pale glow of distant stars, yet her thoughts burned brighter than any fire. For the first time in her long reign, she questioned her judgment. She had mocked the humans. She had called them weak, and yet she realized that strength, courage, and heart could appear in forms she had never expected, and deep inside her, quietly, a new thought began to grow. Maybe these humans were not to be ridiculed at all. Days passed quietly in the Zorath Empire. But peace was fragile. A storm unlike any other began to sweep across the system. Solar flares erupted from the nearest sun, sending waves of energy that crackled through space and tore at planetary shields. The winds on the surface roared like wild beasts, and buildings shivered under the strain of the storm. Even the Queen's grand palace trembled under the power of nature unleashed. Panic spread quickly among the Zoroth. Soldiers rushed to fortify defenses while nobles hid in the safety of their chambers. Many whispered that this storm was a sign of doom, proof that even the mighty Zoroth could not control the universe. Yet, in the midst of chaos, the humans remained calm. Captain Elias Ward and his team had already moved toward the danger. Without hesitation, they coordinated with the palace engineers. guiding them through the safest paths, repairing failing shields, and lifting debris blocking exits. The Queen watched from her balcony as these small beings moved like a single, unstoppable force. Their bodies burned from heat, their lungs ached from smoke, yet they did not pause. They did not flinch. One by one, the humans carried citizens or as children, as elders and wounded soldiers, out of harm's way. They formed human chains, passing those in danger from one person to the next, moving with precision and care. Every human was a link in a chain stronger than steel, and yet gentler than a mother's touch. A sudden collapse of a balcony sent a cloud of dust into the air. The Queen held her breath, fearing for the humans, but Captain Ward leaped forward, catching a small child before the debris hit. Sweat mixed with dust on his face, and blood streaked his arm from a previous scrape. He placed the child down gently, checking the child's condition before moving again to help another Queen. So Lyra felt something she had never felt before. These beings, who she had mocked and ridiculed, were risking their lives for others, not for honor, not for victory, but for compassion. Their courage was different from anything she had known. It was quiet, yet unbreakable, small, yet infinite in its impact. As the storm raged on, the humans continued tirelessly. When a young soldier from the Queen's Guard faltered, Ward caught his arm and whispered encouragement. When the palace's power cores began to fail, the humans worked together with the engineers, shielding the circuits and keeping the lights alive. Every action they took seemed impossible, yet they performed it with steady resolve. Hours passed like this. The Queen could barely believe her eyes. The storm finally began to subside, leaving behind a battered palace, scorched walls, and exhausted survivors. But the humans, though bloodied and bruised, stood tall. Their faces were weary, but their eyes still held that quiet determination, the same light she had seen in the arena. The Queen descended from her balcony, her silver robe flowing behind her. She approached Captain Ward, who was helping a wounded engineer to a safer place. You did this," she said, her voice soft, almost trembling. "You saved lives when everything seemed lost." "Why?" Ward looked up, his breathing heavy but steady.
Ash.
"Because we cannot ignore those in need," he said simply.
Ash.
"Strength is not only for fighting, it is for protecting. It is for standing when others cannot. We do not measure our worth by power alone, Your Majesty. We act because it is right." The Queen lowered her gaze. For centuries, she had measured life by power, conquest, and fear. Yet here in front of her, a small group of humans had shown her a different kind of power, one that moved mountains, calmed storms, and protected life. For the first time, Queen Zalyra felt humility. For the first time, she questioned everything she had believed about strength and warriors. These humans were small, fragile, and mortal. Yet they possessed a force greater than empires, the force of courage, compassion, and unbreakable spirit. And in that moment, she realized the truth she had been blind to. True power was not only in might or domination, but in the heart that refuses to yield. Even when the universe itself seemed against it, the storm had passed, leaving a battered sky and scorched buildings in its wake. The Zorith Palace, though magnificent, bore the marks of chaos-cracked walls, singed banners, and trembling pillars. Yet amid the ruin, one thing was clear: countless lives had been saved. The humans had made it possible. Queen Zalyra walked slowly through the palace corridors, her silver gown trailing softly behind her. The echoes of the storm still lingered in the walls, but they were not the echoes that filled her mind. What filled her mind were the images of humans, small, fragile, and yet astonishingly resilient. They had moved through fire, smoke, and fear, guiding, lifting, and protecting others without hesitation. Every life they saved was a testament to their courage. Captain Elias Ward and his team rested in the central chamber. Wounds evident, clothing torn, yet eyes still bright with determination. Despite exhaustion, they continued to check on the well-being of the Zorith engineers and guards around them. Ward, in particular, carried the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, with grace and humility. Never asking for recognition, never pausing to boast, the queen approached him quietly. Her silver eyes were wide with a mixture of astonishment and a strange, unfamiliar emotion respect. She stopped a few steps away, her voice soft, almost uncertain. "You could have died. Many times," she said. "Yet you risked everything to save others. Why?" Ward looked up at her, the faintest smile touching his bruised face. "Because it is right," he said simply. "We do not fight for fame, for glory, or for power. We fight because others need us. We fight because giving up is not an option. Strength is not only measured by how hard you strike, but by how many you lift when they cannot rise on their own." The queen fell silent. His words echoed in her mind, louder than any roar of her armies, sharper than the edge of her finest blade. She had conquered worlds, crushed civilizations, and ruled empires with unmatched might. Yet, in the presence of these humans, she felt something she had never known in awakening. The human's courage was not flashy or overwhelming, it was quiet, persistent, and unstoppable. It was a power that could not be defeated by weapons, by fear, or even by her own overwhelming authority. "You have shown me something I have never understood," the queen said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "All my life, I believed strength was in domination, in fear, in the ability to destroy. But you taught me that strength can be gentler, yet greater than any empire." Ward nodded. "True power is in heart, Your Majesty, when in unity. In courage that persists even when hope seems lost. Any being can have power, but not every being can inspire others to rise when they fall. That is what makes humans strong." For the first time in her life, Zeliura felt humility settle deep within her chest. She had never experienced it before, not as a ruler, not as a warrior, not as a conqueror. The humans had changed her perception of the universe. She realized that she had underestimated them, not because they lacked strength, but because she had never seen strength expressed in a form so different from her own. She studied Ward's face for a long moment. The exhaustion in his eyes was clear, yet it was tempered by a quiet fire. The queen understood finally that the human's greatest power was not in muscle, not in speed, not in technology, but in the heart that refuses to break, the courage that refuses to falter, and the spirit that refuses to yield. The palace, scarred but standing, felt smaller in her presence. The vastness of the Zorath Empire, the fleets, the conquered worlds, all of it, seemed insignificant compared to the quiet, enduring courage of one small human in his team. "Queen." Zeliura knelt for the first time, not in submission, but in recognition. She saw clearly now that victory was not only about power, but about resilience, compassion, and unwavering resolve. She had always ruled through fear, but these humans ruled through something far stronger, heart. And in that moment, the mighty queen of the Zeroth finally understood. She could command worlds. But the humans commanded something she had never learned: the strength to stand together when everything was against you, the courage to face the impossible without giving in, and the power of a spirit that no force could ever break. The palace was still quiet after the storm, though the halls still smelled faintly of smoke and scorched stone. Queen Zeliura stood at her throne, tall and regal, but the pride in her usual silver eyes was tempered with reflection. She had seen countless battles, countless warriors prove their worth through might and fear. Yet nothing she had witnessed had left her as moved, as unsettled, or as inspired as what the humans had shown. The humans stood before her now, weary, bruised, but unbroken. Captain Elias Ward led them, his chest rising and falling steadily, his hands marked with cuts and soot. There was no boast in his posture, no prideful glare, only quiet dignity and a calm that radiated strength far greater than any sword or shield. For centuries, Queen Zeliura had ruled the Zoroth Empire through fear, conquest, and power. She had believed that strength alone determined the value of a being. Yet these humans, small, mortal, fragile, had displayed a strength she had never known existed. Strength that did not crush, but lifted. A power that did not dominate, but protected. She raised her hand, and the hall fell silent. Even the murmurs of her courtiers faded. I once ridiculed these humans, she began, her voice steady but tinged with awe. I called them weak. I called them fragile. I called them unworthy of being called warriors. Her eyes shifted to Ward, who met her gaze without flinching. But these humans have shown me something I have never understood. They fought when the odds were impossible. They faced the storm, the fire, the fear, and yet they did not yield. They fought not for glory, not for conquest, but for one another. They fought because it was right. They fought because they would not let those weaker than them fall. A hush fell over the court. Even the nobles, the warriors bred for power, looked at the humans with astonishment. They had never seen courage like this. Not in armies, not in champions, not in centuries of conquest. Queen Zelira stepped down from her throne. The golden floor reflected the light of her silver gown. But it was not the light that illuminated the hall, it was the truth she spoke. From this day forward, she declared, Earth and its humans shall be honored as a world of unbroken hearts. The Zorith Empire will remember that true strength is not in power alone, but in courage, compassion, and the will to rise again when all hope is lost. Ward bowed slightly, but it was not just a gesture of respect. It was acknowledgement that the Queen's words were more than titles. They were recognition of the truth she had finally seen, as the courtiers and soldiers watched. Queen Zelira extended her hand toward the humans. You have reminded me, she said, her voice soft but resolute, that a warrior is not measured by size, by armor, or by fearsome might. A warrior is measured by the heart that refuses to break, the courage that refuses to falter, the spirit that lifts others when they cannot rise alone. For the first time in her reign, the queen felt a warmth in her chest, not power, but awe and respect. She realized that the galaxy could not be ruled by fear alone. There was another force, quiet but unstoppable, the heart of humanity. The humans stood together, shoulder to shoulder, as Ward's eyes swept across the hall. The Zorith Empire, for all its might, had bowed not to fear, not to strength, but to the unwavering courage of mortals who refused to yield. Outside the palace, the suns rose on a calm sky, reflecting off the golden walls, casting long shadows that seemed smaller against the light of new understanding. The queen turned her gaze to the horizon, seeing not just planets and empires, but the limitless potential of beings who could stand when all seemed lost. And in that moment, the story of humanity became legend, might because they conquered, but because they inspired. Not because they destroyed, but because they protected. Not because they feared nothing, but because they knew the value of courage, compassion, and heart. Queen Zelira smiled. Truly smiled for the first time in centuries. The humans had taught her a lesson that no army, no weapon, and no throne could ever provide. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was